Welcome, Brent. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate you doing this.
Yeah, nice to be here.
Now, Brent, you started your first company at age 12, and you actually go to the same high school that I'm going to right now. And it was like a computer repair company, if I'm correct. And can you tell us a little bit about that process at such a young age of starting your own company?
Yeah, and it's crazy to think about that. That's now 13 years ago. I think a big aspect of my life has been being in the right place at the right time. And I think in the particular instance of when we started Becom, the first iteration, uh, this was 13 years ago. Amazon was not a household name. You didn't have Amazon Prime. You didn't have really anything relevant um, to digital or online anywhere. I mean, Amazon was emerging on the coast, but it wasn't as developed as it is now. And so we started the company. We at the time was me, but we started the company really just to help people understand and kind of bridge the gap between not having any technical capabilities or frankly knowledge to using it functionally for your business, using it for nonprofits and organizations. I think now obviously with all that's going on in the world, I don't know that people can imagine their careers without technology. At that time when we started, it was almost like it was still a luxury. It wasn't something that, and for some people it still is, but it was definitely not the kind of household standard that you would have 7 devices connected to your Apple account, because Apple accounts didn't exist.
So your business kind of model is kind of switched at least quite a bit from the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit more about what your guys' like vision or kind of what you guys focus on right now at BCom?
Yeah, so we're the digital agency for rural America. That's our tagline. That's what we say in all of our sales pitches, but it's also what we do. We provide rural ag groups, rural broadband, rural economic development, rural political campaigns with digital advertising, marketing, and consulting services. And really, it's an evolution and an iteration on where we started. When we started in Auburn, we had a few customers in Auburn, and then we added some customers in Falls City, and then we added some customers in Nebraska City, and it just kind of grew. And in the process of doing that, what I recognized was that um, businesses and organizations struggle, particularly in rural communities, with how to compete with the digital economy. And so we've specifically narrowed in on what are organizations, groups, and businesses that we have a passion for and an expertise in that we can help grow and thrive. So that may be working with a state ag commodity, a state checkoff group on their marketing and advertising services and helping them kind of evolve from a traditional marketing model to more of a digital model. It also might mean working with a political campaign and figuring out how do you reach rural voters in a statewide race or even in a presidential campaign, as you're thinking about like how do you deliver your message to constituents, customers, donors, and so forth.
What makes like a rural community and a smaller town like we are in right now, what makes that so special compared to your big cities where a lot of like you think of the money and the big tech and the big companies are? What's that difference between the two?
Well, from the perspective of being a teenager in those places, I think many people assume that you live in a rural community, that you're disadvantaged, that you have less. I remember going to college in North Carolina and thinking, oh wow, like the world is my oyster now. And one of the first people I met was from New York, and he goes, "Yeah, I was bored all summer." I'm thinking, okay, so the perception is if you're a young person in a rural community, you're bored and you want to leave. The perception of a young person in New York City, which is obviously not rural, was I'm bored and I want to leave. And so to me, the opportunity that exists. So I kind of squashed that belief early on that rural communities are less. despite the population being less. But what's significantly greater is your ability to build relationships with people, your ability to try something in a safer environment. And I'm not talking about trying things I'm talking about building a business. Like you can try, with the 5 people that you go to church with and sit next to in church, and offer to help them. And because they know you and they trust you, that immersion into the business world is going to be a lot easier. Now, sure, you might be 75 miles from the nearest Starbucks, and traveling as much as I do now, it's like that's my caffeine shot in the morning every morning. But you might not have a Walmart in your town, you might not have all these things, but rural communities are very resilient, and they exist in a very capable way of building something on their own. Where in an urban environment, the assumption is kind of things are just given to you. As the community grows, another coffee shop will inevitably come forth. Well, in a rural community, if you don't have a coffee shop and you want one, the chances are you are probably going to have to be involved in some way, either as their top customer to keep them in business, or the person that opens that coffee shop. And I think that is challenging. It's a lot easier to be 14, 15, 16 years old in Auburn, Nebraska, and be like, I can't wait to get out of here. But as soon as you get to the next place, it's kind of similar to if you don't do homework in high school, it's going to be a lot harder to do homework in college. Now, I did homework in high school and didn't do it in college, which probably, that is why my GPA was so low in college. But the important thing is realizing that in a rural community, you really don't earn a right to complain. And I think this is true everywhere. Similarly in politics, like unless you exercise your commitment to the community, what entitles you to the right to complain about it? It's the same thing when people say, "Oh, well, I don't like politics," or "I don't like list off something," and or "I'm not political," or I'm not going to be involved in the community. Like at some point, you're going to need to be, and that kind of entrepreneurial drive that a rural community has, I think, is something that everyone can learn from in one way or another.
And for your company, or maybe it's just you as a person, but you have like a tagline of define your community, don't let your community define you. And that really hit me really strongly when I heard that first. And it's so true, especially growing up in a small town. Like you said, you always think those people in the bigger cities have everything and have more opportunities. But in reality, it's all about like what you do and the actions you put forward. And I'm fascinated that you went to North Carolina, like you said, but you didn't mention that you went to 2 universities. You went to UNC at Chapel Hill and Duke. Can you talk about your time at college and going to 2 universities and kind of like what you majored in and your experience there?
Yeah. Yes. So I always get some eyebrows raised. The most important question is, I bleed the lighter blue when it comes to basketball. People will always ask me there, and coming from a football state that is Nebraska, and it was so fascinating to me. I would go to the football games my freshman year of college at both schools, but really at UNC because that's where I was my freshman year. And it was just kind of embarrassing. People said, "Oh, well, will you go tailgating with us?" And tailgating was like 5 cars lined up in front of the stadium, and that was it. And I just thought, wow, this is really embarrassing, and didn't even think, because even now Nebraska is definitely not a basketball state yet. But then during basketball, it was like the world just kind of lit on fire. I mean, we shut down streets. If we beat certain teams, we stormed the downtown. Like the energy that existed there was just really fascinating. So yeah, I went to 2 universities, Duke and Chapel Hill. I spent more time at Chapel Hill than I did at Duke. The program that I was so privileged to be a part of is the Robertson Scholars Program, which actually I learned about through FBLA. And so it's a wonderful leadership program between 2 universities. The founder and the naming benefactor of the program had a child that went to each university, and they're about 8 miles apart for people that are like, how do you go to two universities that are very different? And I don't think people realize how close they are. Like 25 minutes down the road, you can get to one or the other. Yeah, so it was a fantastic experience, I think, and something that I encourage anyone to do is to, and for me, that decision was really kind of last minute. I had committed to and was really invested in going to Georgetown in DC several months prior, and this scholarship program's application process, which was pretty intense, was a lot longer, and so everyone had committed to wherever they thought they were going to go. And I near the end of my senior year kind of came to this realization that your life is going to be planned out. And similarly, to the quote that you mentioned about defining your community, for me, I'm a type A extrovert who has everything in order. Like I have a calendar that I follow every day, and the idea of just going as the day flows, just that doesn't work for me. I have to have it blocked out. And I knew that after college, that you don't get rid of your type A. There's not a pill that you can take to be not type A. And I knew that I was going to be a competitive person in whatever career I ended up choosing. And so the opportunity to go to North Carolina, to go to two schools with no debt in the end, versus go to Georgetown and accrue a fairly large amount of debt, arguably for good reason, for a fantastic education, but to go to two of those was kind of a no-brainer to me when I really thought it through and kind of got rid of the mystique of living in DC and so forth. So that's kind of, and I had a lot of fun along the way. It's something that for people that are listening that have not yet gone to college and are thinking about it. I obviously started this company before I had a college degree. I'm not one of those people that say, "Oh, I could have done this without college." But the value of a college education to me, and I think to people that are more outgoing and ambitious than maybe the average person, is the opportunity to be in an environment where, one, you can network with an entirely new group of people every year. No other time in your life every year there's a complete reset where, if you think about it from a business perspective, if you had a 25% turnover rate with your customers every year, you would be a horrible business. But in this particular case, every year at a university, a four-year institution, that it rolls over. Be it at a community college, even greater. So the ability to network and have a conversation and then to learn from people that are experts was really great.
Being in high school, there's so many opportunities that are available to us and that you can kind of put in the work if you want to get out the rewards in the end. And I'm curious about your time in high school. You mentioned FBLA and obviously starting your own company. What were you able to do in high school that prepared you for your time in college and then obviously later in life where you are now? What were some of the things that you kind of focused on or maybe learned throughout those 4 years in high school?
Yeah. I'm a big believer that relationships are really important. Um, and I have more friends that are, in their 40s, 50s, and 60s and older than I probably do that are 25, 26, 27. Uh, and that was true kind of from the beginning. I went to church in a church in Auburn, and that those were the people that we would see multiple times a week because our family was really involved in the church. And just building relationships with people, I think, was important. My dad owns a small business in Auburn, and that really is built on the basis of, like, people hire him because they want to work with him and they trust him. It's not the largest business of that kind in town. It's not but people know that they can trust him and that he's a genuinely good person. And I think seeing that early was, and in many ways, from parents to mentors to just business people in town, to seeing that's important. And why does that matter? Well, if you spend your time in high school racking up a bunch of trouble points with people, like that, they remember that. Now I got in all sorts of trouble in many different ways. But it's probably not for the subject of this call or this interview, but um, the relationship piece was really important, and then maintaining those. I think, if you're an ambitious person, you're probably going to live in multiple places. You're probably going to go a lot of places, on any given year. Normally, not in COVID, I'm traveling, 100, 150, 200 days out of the year, and I'm always gone, and it's pretty rare. It used to be pretty rare for me to be in our offices more than 2 or 3 days out of the week. And so keeping those relationships with people has been really important, because that's how we were able to build our business before and even to this day are still able to build it, because we're competing against people that have been in the industry for 30 years. I haven't even been alive for 30 years. Um, so I think in high school I learned that, and also was a suck up to a lot of teachers. So that doesn't necessarily do you any harm, I don't think. And then the other thing was, and growing up if you're in a rural high school, being able to participate in 9 different things may seem overwhelming, or to those teenagers that are if you're 14, 15, 16, and you're the president of National Honor Society, and you're on the football team and the track team, that is not normal in a lot of large communities and cities. I mean, you pick 1 or 2 things because there are 500 activities at a school, and so you have to pick the things that you do. And for me, getting to practice leadership, not knowing it at the time, in the context of being in show choir, and being in clubs, and being in FBLA, and at the beginning of high school, I was in track, and was on the cross country team, and so those types of opportunities, I think you don't take for granted later. You probably do at the time that they're happening. At least I did.
The relationship part of that, of your answer there, was really really great, and every guest that we've had on this show so far has mentioned the value of mentors and
Mm.
mentorship being so vital to any successful life that you may have. I'm curious about how you were able to cultivate those relationships at such a young age. Being in high school, what can listeners take away right now to begin fostering those relationships?
Yeah. Well, admittedly, I have not listened to the other episodes. So if I
It's all
repeat
good.
something that is the same that someone else has said, just use that as a verified source for whatever they said. But um, number one, if you're a high school student or college student, um, reach out to people now, because it's a lot easier for them to be willing to have a conversation with you as a student, than when you're an adult. And I can say that even only having been out of school for a couple of years, it's still easier, I think, for me to get in touch with someone than, say, someone who's been in marketing and advertising for 40 years, um, because they want to see people grow, right? But when you're in high school and in college, um, everyone that's in some sort of leadership capacity had at least one person, even if they don't realize it at the time, that helped them get to where they need to be. And you reaching out kind of pulls a repressed memory back from whenever that time happened for them. So, in your particular context, like, I know that you're involved in FBLA at a local and state level, and similarly was I. So there's like a memory, like, oh, I remember when I did these things. And in college, it was the same way. And now it's kind of the inverse, because we'll have interns at Ecom that will come in, and they'll sit in my office and talk to me, and they'll ask, oh, is there a book that I read that helped get there? And I have a shelf full of random books. Most of them I haven't read. I mean, that's step one in being a CEO, is you just have a shelf full of things that are irrelevant. But the important thing to me was to find people that weren't afraid to tell me um, the honest truth. And I think that that's harder. And so that's the difference, right, between a parent and a mentor. my parents have mentored me in many capacities and have taught me, and sometimes it was a hard teaching. But mentors are people that have no invested interest in anything other than they want to help see you grow in the way that you want to grow. If they don't want that for you, then they're not a mentor. And so and many people's parents are mentors to other people, but I think a lot of times people go, oh well, my parents said. And even in college I had friends and roommates that they would ask their parents for things or for advice on the phone, and I could just hear the conversation and the dialogue happening, where it's like, well, it's very clear what answer they're going to give. Like, you're always going to be right when it's versus someone else because you're their child. um, I have had and have been really blessed. And also, the other kind of downside to finding mentors that are significantly older than I am is, have been the last, since I moved back in the last 3 years, of the kind of 4 or 5 people that I have leaned on for advice, 3 of them have passed away. And the recognition that they keep coming back, and this is how I know that they what they said resonates, because one particular mentor, Anne Marie, she was we had the connection of UNC. She was an executive MBA student at UNC long before I was there, but that alumni network is really powerful. So when you're thinking about picking a college, think about and look at the statistics for the alumni that are engaged, because that generally means that they enjoyed their time there. Um, but Anne Marie was someone that she never, candidly speaking, there was no BS with Anne Marie. She would just say, "Nope, nope. You're thinking about it the wrong way, or you need to look at it this way, or here's the devil's advocate point of view." And in the 2 years that I knew her and spent time with her, I think I learned more than in the 4 years that I attended UNC and Duke, and probably in the dozens and dozens of meetings and professional development things that I've done. So find someone, and guess what? The worst thing that could happen is you say, "Hey, Brent," or "Hey, someone like Anne Marie," or "Hey, so and so, would you can I have a conversation with you?" And if they say no, then say, "Okay, well, thanks for nothing," and then you move on to the next one. So I encourage people. I don't think there's any point that's too soon to find a mentor. And the good news is that if you don't know who would be a good mentor to you, probably someone does.
Yeah, that's great. At least from my experience, just making that first ask or just reaching out, you'll find who your mentors and who should be your mentors just from that. The ones
Yeah,
that will truly engage with you and kind of just start right from that beginning with, they don't need to like get something from you. They'll just kind of be there to help when other people might not respond or they want something in return. Like those people, you don't necessarily need them
right.
to help coach you. And so after your time at Duke and UNC, you came back to Nebraska in the middle of the country when I'm sure you had plenty of opportunities to go West Coast, East Coast, big cities, kind of like we talked about.
Yeah.
What's the importance to you of home roots and coming back to like the community that kind of brought you up and turned you into the person that you were?
Yeah. It's For me, the decision at the time when it was time to make a decision was really easy. The 3 years prior to that, I had so freshman year of college, BCom had, and the intention was that when enough people said fare thee well to our from our customer base, that we would just evaporate.
Yeah.
And for some reason, the further away I was, the more customers we got in Southeast Nebraska. And so at the point that my sophomore, junior year of college rolled around, it was very clear that either I was going to need to come back, or we were going to need to figure out how to do something. Because at that point, we had multiple people on payroll, we had people on a benefits package, we had people, I mean, there was all of these different components that um, um, that were really uh, compelling to me, that we weren't done building BCom. And when I moved back, interestingly enough, for my friends in college, they were like, "Oh my gosh, you're moving to Nebraska." Like most of them went to Atlanta, New York, San Francisco. Austin, Chicago, and so me moving to Nebraska in and of itself was like, wow. That the professors were like, okay. But then when I got to Nebraska, I was like, okay, well, at that point, when I moved back 3 years ago, we had plenty of customers around the country, and so um, um, the process of being far away from an airport it was really hard for me. And so I was like, okay, well, if I live in Auburn, I'm going to need to drive at least 150 miles a week minimum, just to go on one trip. And that's assuming that I don't go to Lincoln or Omaha, just to the airport. People in Auburn and people in Southeast Nebraska, and I've heard it, and people are probably listening to it, and they're like, well, he doesn't even live in Auburn. How can he be the rural champion, and run this company? It's like, well, first of all, in the grand scheme of the United States map, most of America is rural, geographically speaking. And in that context, if you live in Des Moines or even Kansas City, like that's the middle. To us in rural Southeast Nebraska, Kansas City is like, it's the city. Like if you go to it's like you go to Lincoln, you go to Omaha, okay, you go to Kansas City, like holy moly. And so this is all ties back to, for me, place and that community and building that community is really defined by how you let it and how you play a role in that definition. Um, I don't think it's not surprising to the people that know me and to know where our company is going that I'll probably spend half or more of my time in DC, New York in the future, East Coast, West Coast, um, and and so that to me is less important than proving and showing every day that you can build really anything you want, despite what other people say, in a location that you choose. And that's the beauty of entrepreneurship, I think. Sure, it's been difficult. It's been really difficult when you spend 4 years living in the same hallway with a bunch of the same people, and then you get uprooted and you're no longer in the same hallway. You're not even in the same time zone. Um, but I think that's part of the growth of how we move rural communities forward. Because in the past, the model has been, you're either there and you stay there forever, or you're there and you leave and you stay gone forever, or you leave and you go somewhere else, and then when the going gets tough, you come back. And that's not I don't think that's a model for leadership. I think the model that we have built and the model that I believe is that your roots, like the more you can tap into them, to remind yourself. And for us, that means at least once a day, I'm talking to someone on our team that's based in our Auburn office. And so that's constantly making me connected while also allowing us to grow so that we can continue to deliver value and give back to the rural communities that we represent.
If you could distill your time as a CEO and entrepreneur into a very simple, actionable tip or lesson learned, what would you tell someone who asks, Brent, what have you learned from being a CEO and entrepreneur?
Mm. Hmm. That's a great question. Normally, I get open-ended questions I can just rattle on them. Well, I'll give you a very candid one. It's lonely, and I don't think people share that, or are afraid to. But you think about it from the perspective of, if you are the CEO and the owner of the business at the same time, which owner and CEO, in many large companies, the CEO just gets a fat paycheck,
Mhm.
and in the capacity of being the owner and an entrepreneur, the the constant conflict is, okay, you want to deliver the very best to your customers, right? So you're pleasing them, or trying to, and delivering value to them, and you want to make money from them, so you want to pull a profit in, you want to bring in revenue. Then you want to build, if you want to build a company, you want to build a team where people enjoy coming to work, which is not directly correlated to compensation. But if you give people a healthy working environment where they don't feel like it's a mass production machine where you're just taking advantage of them, then you probably have to invest money. But then that money that you're bringing in from these other people is then being given to other people. And then as the company continues to grow, you sit there and go like, this is all sitting on my shoulders. When our employees and our team members walk into our offices, they very likely don't walk and count the cost of per square footage of space that for the last 4.5 months has been totally unused. The cost of rent for all of our offices is like larger than most people's 2 times a month paycheck. And it has been just sunk cost. Like if I told you, hey, do you want to throw away $8,000, $9,000 a month for the next 5 months, you'd be like, well, no. And who do you have those conversations with, right? Because if you talk about them, and I'm sure someone from our team will find this podcast and listen to it at some point, probably the people that are going to tag it on social media or something. But it is a challenging task to find, and that's where the success of a CEO really is, I think, is distilled down. If I have a great group of friends that are not employees, that are not family members, that are just people that care about me. And it's weird because I imagine many people assume that if Brent's the boss, then it's all about him all the time because he gets to set the direction and so forth, particularly in Southeast Nebraska, where at the time when we built this, it was just me. But now it's a matter of like, you want people to grow in their roles. You want them to succeed. And in order for them to succeed, they have to fail, which for them to fail probably means that one of these customers gets mad. And then you might lose that customer. And then you've got to figure out, okay, how do I mean, it's this constant back and forth. And if you don't let it, if you don't think about it being kind of an empty vacuum, I don't report to anyone. I have a board, I have a boss. And so when things get really difficult, yeah, I don't get the option of being like, I'll let someone else figure that out. Like if it comes to me, it's probably because either A, I've micromanaged it, which is probably a more likely answer, or B, it's been unsolved or needs to be thought about differently than it has been on the people on our team. That's not to say I don't think lonely or I don't think that's a negative thing per se,
Mhm.
but what it is important, if you're the type of person that needs empathy constantly surrounding you, and I don't want to say coddling in a way that makes it sound like that person is less, but the majority of the world is employed by someone. And so that's a different mentality, that dependency on that person. It takes a very, I won't say unique, more like kind of crazy person to be like, oh yeah, I can stick my neck out there, and I'm willing to let 20 people's livelihoods ride on the company that I built. Um, Most of the day I don't think about that because I think that is just freaky to think about on a regular basis. Um, but ignorance to that fact, I think, is where you find a lot of businesses that will grow. Maybe they'll become really large, add 30, 40, 50, 60 people, and then all of a sudden 2, 3 years later, they're either selling out to someone or they're closing up shop. And it's, I think, largely because of leadership and the model of leadership that they display, which is hard. It's, there's no college class or high school business class that says, here's what to do when you employ someone who's 5 times your age. So I don't know that answered the question, but that's my statement for today. You can probably find another answer to that that's completely different. But
No, that's great. I love the honesty there. That's huge, and your authenticity I know is big with your company there. But as a team leader yourself in high school, you definitely showed great leadership skills through FBLA and then your company. What is the key factor in a great team leader? What sets them apart from every other high schooler out there that doesn't go above and beyond?
I think a willingness to to lead for the purpose of the mission of the group, as opposed to leading for the purpose of your own self-interest. Um, I joke with our clients a lot that, they'll say, "Can you do this or can you do that?" And I'll say, "Yes, we live to serve." And they kind of snicker because they know that we're serving by getting paid. Um, but I really think that, and I was not always this way, and sometimes I still am not this way. Many times I'm not. But people look to people that are their leaders, um, in times of like growth and excitement, but also in times of great frustration and challenges and so forth. A lot of times, I think people assume that the leader's the nicest person, the smartest person, the most successful person, the best looking person. The digital and social media world has certainly not helped with that.
Yeah.
Um, and you develop, I think, the more you spend time in some sort of leadership capacity, a pretty good litmus test for who's in it to lead for themselves and who's in it to lead for a mission and a purpose. For example, I could go make more money and have a lot less stress with the college degrees that I have, and probably in a place where I'd meet more people, and would probably have more time for personal life and wouldn't be awake until 2 a.m. working on it. But I'm not doing this for self-interest of myself. I'm doing it because for far too long, and the reason that BCom exists is for far too long, people have perceived rural America as this desolate desert, or, and there's nothing wrong with this, as only the place where farmers live, which we know is critical and the number one backbone of the economy of both the state and the country. But um, I have seen many people either before me or after me that have thought that just rural America is just living on a slow heartbeat. Um, and I don't think that that's true. And I think the way that we tell stories, the way that we help our clients tell stories, makes them proud to be part of what is the majority geographically of the country. That's why I do what I do. Knowing people's why is also really important. And sometimes their why is because they want to get to the next place. I have many friends from college who they became a business management consultant, which is what a lot of people do when they leave business school. And their why for being a consultant is so that they can be at a company long enough that they'll pay for their MBA, so that then they can quit being a consultant and go do something else. And that's it. That's an answer, and it's a free MBA. If you get into Harvard, that's a lot of money that you don't have to pay. Um, and people just have to know that. And I think as a leader, team leader or not, it's hard to develop because you're also growing as a leader. But the more you can, even if you don't publicly say like, "Hey, Lucas, I know what your why is,"
Mhm.
but knowing in my mind what it is makes me and the interactions that we have together much more valuable to both ends. Because if you're here for the same mission that I'm here for, then I'm gonna integrate you into the culture. I'm gonna make sure that you're getting opportunities to do X, Y, and Z, and so forth. If your why is that you want to work with us through, December of 2021 and then move to Tahiti, when I'm thinking about promotions and growth and who I put my key client relationships in with our team, then I just make those decisions early on. I think knowing that is really important, and it's hard to learn, and it's a constant learning process.
So glad you mentioned that why part, because well, there's a book by Simon Sinek. I don't know if you're aware, but Start with Why, and that book really changed how I like viewed life and kind of went about like leadership more specifically. But knowing someone's why and like why they're doing something, not just what they're doing, has been really eye-opening. And your why is so inspiring to me, and I know hundreds of others. But Brent, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I love the things that we were able to get out of your experiences through college, high school, and then
Sure.
your company. So I just can't thank you enough.
Hey, I love what you're doing. Let me know how I can be helpful, and I hope that the listeners will at least listen to us all the way through my rambling.
No, I'm sure they will. It was great. Okay. Thanks, Brent.